This woman's crimes were so horrific that she became the first female in the history of France to receive a full life sentence. In 2022, 12-year-old Lola disappeared after school in Paris, and security footage from the apartment building where she lived with her family showed her walking inside with 27-year-old Dabia Ben-Kirid following closely behind. Hours later, Lola's body was found stuffed inside a plastic storage box in the lobby of that same building. Investigators say Ben-Kirid lured the girl into her own sister's apartment, who lived upstairs, where she forced Lola to shower, taped her face, stabbed her repeatedly, and subjected her to what the judge called true torture, ultimately killing her through asphyxiation before eventually decapitating her. Ben-Kirid initially confessed, then kept changing her story, and even showed complete indifference when confronted with photos of the gruesome crime. In 2025, she became the first woman in French history to receive a whole life sentence, a punishment previously reserved for only 4 men. The tragedy deepened when Lola's father died in 2024 from alcohol-related complications brought on by the grief of losing his daughter. Brian Egg vanished in August of 2018 after suddenly disappearing from his San Francisco home. Weeks later, police went to the house for a welfare check and discovered a hidden room concealed behind a fake wall. Inside was a single large fish tank containing Brian's body, decapitated and missing both hands. Investigators later determined he'd been murdered by his roommate after an argument over rent and drug money while the two were using cocaine. After killing him, the roommate cut off Brian's head and hands, hid the body in the aquarium, filled it with water to slow down the decomposition, and sealed the room behind a fake wall. The killer, named Jeffrey Francisco, then fled the state but was eventually tracked down and arrested. Although he was originally charged with murder and facing several decades in prison, Francisco was allowed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which made him eligible for early parole. In 2021, after only serving about 7 years of a 15-year sentence, the killer was released, a decision that sparked outrage when the public learned he was free. This man is exactly why you should always lock your doors no matter what. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento, was a severely schizophrenic serial killer who believed his blood was drying up since he couldn't get his schlong up. In his twisted mind, the only cure was to drink blood and consume organs to restore himself. He started with wild animals, blending their organs with soda, but in 1977 he escalated, murdering 6 people within a month. He had one horrifying rule: if a door was locked, he walked away, but if it was unlocked, he took it as an invitation from God to enter. Once inside, Chase committed violent crimes so graphic even veteran detectives vomited. He shot his victims, drank their blood straight from the wounds, disemboweled them, cannibalized body parts, and even stuffed animal feces into their mouths. In one case, he decapitated a 22-month-old baby and blended the organs into a drink. Police later found a blender filled with human organs mixed with orange juice, a human smoothie he kept in his fridge like groceries. While in court, he showed zero remorse, insisting that he had to kill or else he would die. Sentenced to death by gas chamber in 1979, even other death row inmates were terrified of him and begged guards to keep him away. But before the state could execute him, Chase overdosed on hoarded antidepressants in his cell and died at the young age of 30. Here's a police sketch that was released during the investigation into the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, a case that remains unsolved nearly 2 decades later. In 2007, Madeleine vanished from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, while her parents were dining nearby. She'd been left asleep with her younger siblings, and when her mother went to check on the children later that night, Madeleine's bed was empty and the bedroom window was open. As the investigation dragged on, police issued multiple suspect sketches based on eyewitness accounts, including one female person of interest that later drew widespread attention due to its striking resemblance to Ghislaine Maxwell, the British former socialite who was convicted in 2021 of trafficking girls for Jeffrey Epstein. Despite one of the largest missing child investigations in European history, no definitive trace of Madeleine has ever been found, as her fate remains unknown. Dan Burroughs was a high-ranking white supremacist in the 1960s, serving as the 3rd highest member of the American Nazi Party and a Grand Dragon of the New York KKK. But in 1965, the New York Times revealed that Burroughs was actually Jewish, raised in a Jewish family, attended Hebrew school, and even had a bar mitzvah. Hours after the article was published, and the organizations he led immediately disavowed him as the revelation became public. This 2,000-year-old mummy shows astonishing precision in the linen wrapping around its head, layered so neatly it looks machine woven rather than done by hand. The unique artifact is the only mummy housed in the Louvre Museum, offering an incredible glimpse into how carefully the ancient Egyptians prepared their dead for eternity. When this Roman mosaic was unearthed in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists realized it had survived an earthquake without cracking, the waves of stone still perfectly frozen in the moment the earth vibrated beneath it. The horse-drawn omnibus of the 1890s was once the most reliable form of transport in city streets. Crowded with strangers and pulled by exhausted animals, it clattered over cobblestones long before the first car horn ever sounded. Czech photographer Miroslav Tichy built his cameras out of trash, cardboard tubes, tin cans, and bits of string. The crude lenses produced blurry, distorted images that looked damaged or decayed, yet he embraced the flaws. Between the 60s and 80s, he took thousands of photos of women in his hometown, turning obsession, imperfection, and voyeurism into an unsettling form of art. Sweden once let the public crawl inside the world's only taxidermied blue whale, a 19th century relic preserved at the Natural History Museum in Gothenburg. Built in 1865, the exhibit was so massive that visitors could walk through its body to view a small museum inside. But in the 1970s, public access was abruptly ended when a couple was reportedly caught having intercourse inside the whale's belly. In 2005, Florida retirees Reggie and Carol Sumner thought they had found peace in their Jacksonville home, but instead, they fell victim to one of the most sadistic crimes imaginable. Lured by Tiffany Cole, a woman they once treated like family, the couple was ambushed by her and 3 accomplices, who bound, gagged, and stuffed them into the trunk of their own car. They were driven across state lines to a remote patch of Georgia woods where a grave had already been dug for them. Still alive, terrified, and gasping for air, the Sumners were thrown into the hole and buried alive beneath the dirt, left to slowly suffocate as the killers laughed about the money they were about to steal. The reason for this unimaginable cruelty was shockingly small: to steal from the couple's life savings of less than $100,000. All 4 were quickly caught and convicted, with Tiffany later being sentenced to death. This was the horrifying moment when Jane Goodall uncovered the savage truth behind chimpanzees. In the 1970s, Goodall and her team witnessed a shocking 4-year conflict known today as the Gombe Chimpanzee War. A single chimp community in Tanzania split into 2 rival factions, and the carnage that followed shattered the long-held belief that chimps were peaceful creatures. The war started when 6 males ambushed a lone rival and tore him to shreds, and over the next few years, the stronger group carried out coordinated raids in which every male of the weaker side was hunted down and killed in brutal fashion. Females were beaten, kidnapped, and often murdered until the losing community was completely wiped out. For Goodall, who had once described her chimps as gentle and idyllic, the violence was devastating. She admitted to having constant nightmares about the carnage and about watching individuals she had known since infancy transform into cold-blooded killers. The scientific world was equally shaken. The war revealed that chimpanzees, like humans, are capable not only of affection and cooperation, but also of organized warfare, murder, and ruthless extermination. This little girl was diagnosed with dementia before she even turned 4. When Sophia Scott was 3 years old, her parents noticed her speaking and development were going backwards. The day before her 4th birthday, doctors told her family she had Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare genetic disease that prevents the body from breaking down certain sugars, causing them to build up in the brain and slowly destroy the nervous system. They were told there was no treatment and that she was unlikely to survive past her teenage years. Sophia developed mostly normally at first, but around age 6 she began to decline. Over time, she lost her speech, memory, and her ability to walk and care for herself. She later developed seizures, sleep apnea, scoliosis, bowel problems, and more than 30 different symptoms. Sanfilippo syndrome is often called childhood Alzheimer's, and most children begin showing symptoms between ages 1 and 4, usually dying in their teens. Now 15 years old, Sophia has lost much of her abilities. Her family continues searching for experimental treatment, but doctors believe it may be too late to reverse the damage. In the final stages of this disease, the brain forgets how to control basic functions like swallowing and breathing, and most patients die from complications such as pneumonia, respiratory failure, or cardiac arrest. In November of 2021, 23-year-old Tina Tintor was driving home in Las Vegas after taking her golden retriever Max out for a late-night walk when her car was suddenly struck at more than 150 miles per hour by NFL wide receiver Henry Ruggs III, who was heavily intoxicated. The impact sent her Toyota RAV4 up in flames, trapping both Tina and Max inside as bystanders desperately tried but failed to pull them out. Both were killed in the blaze, and Ruggs, who had a BAC more than twice the legal limit, was later sentenced to prison for DUI, resulting in death. In 1991, schizophrenic artist Brian Charnley began a project unlike any other. He would paint 17 self-portraits as he gradually stopped taking his medication, documenting his slow descent into psychosis. Each canvas grew more chaotic and fragmented, mirroring his unraveling mind. His final portrait, completed on the varied 1991, remains a chilling testament to both his mental illness and artistic talent. This was the mask worn by 51-year-old Vance Luther Bolter when he posed as a police officer and ambushed Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette at their Champlin home in June of 2025. Dressed in a tactical vest and carrying a flashlight, he knocked on their door in the middle of the night, and the moment Hoffman said, "You're not a cop," Bolter opened fire. Bullets tore through the couple in their doorway. John struck 9 times, Yvette 8, as their terrified daughter Hope hid just feet away while her mother shielded her body with her own. Somehow, both parents survived after hours of surgery, but they were left in critical condition. However, the carnage didn't stop there. Hours later, Bolter stormed into the home of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, executing she and her husband Gary as they both slept. Investigators later uncovered that he carried a disturbing hit list, targeting Democratic politicians and abortion providers, revealing the massacre as a carefully planned campaign of political terror, one that left Minnesota shaken to its core. Joey Gatos Jr., the child actor who played Zach Mooneyham in School of Rock, was arrested in Florida in 2019 after allegedly stealing multiple guitars and amplifiers from local music stores. Authorities said he'd enter shops, test out pricey instruments like a professional, then simply walk out the door with them before pawning them off for quick cash. The spree reportedly lasted several weeks before he was caught, and police suggested the thefts were connected to struggles with substance abuse. Once celebrated for his guitar skills on screen, Gatos' real-life downfall was a far cry from the rock star dream that made him famous. In 1926, jazz legend Fats Waller was leaving a Chicago nightclub when 4 armed men suddenly grabbed him, threw him into a car, and drove off. Initially terrified, Waller soon realized he wasn't being robbed. He was being delivered as a surprise birthday gift to none other than mob boss Al Capone. Forced to play piano at Capone's private party, Waller ended up performing for 3 straight days, while dozens of gangsters cheered, drank, and shoved cash into his pockets. When it was finally all over, Waller stumbled out of the mansion completely drunk, covered in sweat, and stuffed with thousands of dollars in tips. Despite the bizarre ordeal, Waller reportedly laughed it off afterwards, saying it was the best paying gig he ever had by far. In 2012, 18-year-old Gabby Scanlon was celebrating her birthday at Oscar's Wine Bar in Lancaster, England, when staff served her a cocktail topped with liquid nitrogen. Moments after downing the smoking drink, she felt a violent pain in her abdomen. Doctors later said it was as if her stomach had exploded from the freezing chemical. She was rushed into emergency surgery, where doctors had to remove her entire stomach and reroute her digestive tract just to save her life. 3 years later, in 2015, the bar was fined £100,000 for failing to recognize the danger of serving cocktails still bubbling with liquid nitrogen. Kansas City pharmacist Robert Ray Courtney illegally diluted thousands of medications, including chemotherapy, over nearly a decade, claiming extra profit. Estimates put the number of affected patients at about 4,200, with some treatments watered down to as low as 17% of the prescribed dose. Convicted in 2002 and sentenced to 30 years, he was released to home confinement in 2024 under the First Step Act, sparking outrage from victims who think his actions contributed to serious harm and deaths. In August of 2020, 5-year-old Cannon Hinent was riding his bike outside of his Wilson, North Carolina home when his 25-year-old neighbor Darius Sessoms suddenly walked up and shot him point-blank in the head in front of his 2 sisters. The murder was described as execution style and left the community completely stunned, especially since Sessoms had shared dinner with Cannon's family just days prior. He was arrested within 24 hours and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, receiving life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, no clear motive has ever been revealed. Here's a photo of George Lincoln Rockwell, founder of the American Nazi Party, at a 1967 rally. Rockwell built his movement around hate-filled rallies in open admiration for Hitler. But his end came not at the hands of his enemies. In August of 1967, Rockwell was gunned down outside of a laundromat in Arlington, Virginia, shot twice through his car window by John Patler, a bitter former ally he had recently expelled from the party. The man who preached violence and division was assassinated by one of his own followers, leaving the American Nazi Party leaderless and fractured. This innocent-looking photo was one of the last selfies taken of Chris Kremers and Lee Sanfroon on April 1st, 2014, shortly before they vanished while hiking the El Pianista Trail in Panama. The photo was taken near the trail's end, where hikers are supposed to turn back, but for some reason, the two continued deeper into the jungle instead. In the days that followed, Froon's phone was repeatedly powered off and on as emergency calls were attempted. On the night of April 8th, her camera captured over 90 flash photos in total darkness. Among them is a disturbing close-up believed to show the back of Kremers' head with strands of hair lit up by the flash. It's unknown if either woman was alive by the time these photos were taken. Months later, their backpacks and skeletal remains were found scattered along the jungle, and the exact circumstances of their deaths remain unknown. In 2017, Brooke Preston was brutally killed inside her home by her longtime friend and roommate Randy Herman Jr. after he stabbed her 25 times. Herman admitted he carried out the attack but claimed he was sleepwalking and had no memory of killing her. Investigators found no medical or behavioral evidence to support a sleepwalking episode, and prosecutors argued the number, placement, and force of the wounds showed conscious intent. The sleepwalking defense was ultimately rejected by the jury, who convicted Herman and sentenced him to prison for the rest of his life. NHL star Johnny Gaudreau, known as Johnny Hockey, built a reputation as one of the league's most electric, undersized scorers, dazzling fans with elite speed despite standing just 5'9". But in August of 2024, he returned to his New Jersey hometown with his younger brother Matthew for their sister's wedding weekend, a trip meant to be a celebration. While riding bicycles together along a rural road at night, police say a drunk driver attempted to pass traffic and slammed into both brothers from behind, killing them at the young ages of 31 and 29. Prosecutors later charged the driver with aggravated manslaughter, reckless vehicular homicide, evidence tampering, and leaving the scene, with the case still moving through courts as the hockey world mourned one of its brightest stars. But just today, after Team USA defeated Canada in overtime to secure Olympic gold, players carried Gaudreau's number 13 jersey onto the ice and brought his children into the celebration, dedicating the victory to him in an emotional tribute that showed how deeply his loss still resonates across the sport. She endured abortion after abortion until her body could no longer take it. In 2017, a woman in eastern China reportedly died after undergoing 4 abortions in a single year, each one carried out under pressure from her husband, who was determined to have a son. When every pregnancy resulted in a girl, he insisted she terminate, ignoring the strain it put on her health. After the 4th procedure, her body gave out and she succumbed to the damage. A grim reminder of how cultural obsession with male heirs can turn deadly. At the height of his YouTube and FaZe Clan fame, Norden Chat, aka FaZe Rain, spiraled into a drug addiction so destructive that millions of fans watched him unravel in real time. What began with casually showing off painkillers to his audience escalated to him swallowing alarming amounts of pills on stream, bragging about it while his body silently deteriorated. By 2020, Rain was suffering seizures, collapsing, and eventually lost the ability to walk. Doctors warned the nerve damage in his legs might be permanent, leaving him in a wheelchair and forcing him into grueling therapy. His addiction wrecked friendships, destroyed his career, and turned a gaming star into a cautionary tale as fans saw him posting from hospital beds and fighting through constant pain. But after years of setbacks and near-death lows, he finally clawed his way back to sobriety. Rain can now walk again, is slowly attempting to rebuild his career, and now shares his harrowing story as a warning about how fast addiction can take everything. In December of 1988, Hollywood cameraman Bob Samuels, whose credits included Short Circuit, The Color Purple, and Beverly Hills Cop 2, was found shot to death in his Northridge home, killed through a pillow used as a crude silencer. Investigators later accused his estranged wife, Mary Ellen Samuels, of arranging the murder to collect a $500,000 life insurance payout. Afterwards, she was said to have spent lavishly, including a Cancun trip where photos surfaced of her posing nude with large amounts of cash. Prosecutors also alleged that when the hired gunman began cooperating with authorities, she arranged for him to be strangled before he could testify. She was ultimately convicted for her role in the conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. In August of 1993, 6 Kazakhstani hikers died during a trek through Siberia's Kamar-Daban mountain range. The only survivor later told investigators that members of the group suddenly began screaming, bleeding from their eyes and ears, foaming at the mouth, and clawing at their throats before collapsing one by one on the mountainside. Official reports ultimately ruled most of the deaths as hypothermia, with the group leader reportedly dying from a heart attack. But the survivor's description of the final moments has kept the incident controversial, with theories ranging from altitude sickness and poisoning to extreme weather exposure. In the 1950s, doctors at Tulane University, led by Dr. Robert Heath, conducted one of the most disturbing neuroscience experiments in history. They implanted an electrode into a woman's brain, right in the region responsible for pleasure, and gave her a button that let her trigger it whenever she wanted. The result was terrifying. She began pressing the button non-stop for hours, then days, completely abandoning her family, her responsibilities, and even basic hygiene. She refused to eat or sleep, ignored everyone around her, and focused only on getting another jolt of artificial euphoria. She pressed it so obsessively that she developed an open, bleeding sore on her finger, but kept going anyway. When doctors finally took the device away, she begged them to give it back, became depressed and agitated, and even showed withdrawal-like symptoms because nothing in real life gave her pleasure anymore. The case horrified researchers so badly that human pleasure center experiments were largely shut down because it proved that if you could manually trigger happiness, it might destroy your ability to live without it. In honor of Jane Goodall, these are the most bizarre and disturbing behaviors ever observed in chimpanzees. In 2008, a chimpanzee from Zambia named Julie was spotted with a strange new habit. She would stick a piece of grass in her ear and just leave it there. It served no purpose for food, grooming, or communication. But soon enough, other chimps in her group began copying her, as researchers eventually realized this was the first fashion statement ever observed in the wild. Lucy the chimpanzee was raised from birth to believe she was a human. She learned to sign over 250 words in American Sign Language, but also picked up some rather disturbing human habits. Lucy developed a taste for gin, spent time flipping through Playgirl magazines, and even used a vacuum cleaner to masturbate. When she became too difficult to control, researchers released her into the wild, but years later her body was found mutilated, most likely killed by poachers. Azalea the chimpanzee lives in a North Korean zoo and has been known to smoke a pack of cigarettes per day. She's learned to use a lighter and can even light one cigarette with the burning end of another. In Uganda, scientists observed young chimpanzees caring for sticks and rocks as if they were children caring for dolls. They cradled them, carried them into nests, and treated them as if they were babies. The eerie implication is that chimps, like humans, may be capable of imagination and symbolic play. In 1997, a chimpanzee named Santino stunned researchers with his violent planning at a Swedish zoo. Each morning, while calm, he gathered stones and stacked them in hidden piles around his enclosure. Later in the day, when he became agitated, he used those piles to launch surprise attacks on zoo visitors. It was the first clear evidence that an animal had deliberately prepared for future violence. There's a surgery so incredibly bizarre that's called tooth and eye surgery. Known medically as osteoodontokeratoprosthesis, it's a last resort operation for people with severe corneal blindness. Surgeons remove one of the patient's canine teeth, root and jawbone included, hollow it out, and fit it with a tiny plastic lens. The bizarre implant is first stitched underneath the skin of the cheek for months, where it swells, fuses with flesh, and even grows its own blood supply before it's transplanted into the blind eye. Surgeons describe the moment of implantation as one of the most surreal in medicine, sliding a blood-soaked tooth back out of the cheek and into the empty cornea. The body is far less likely to reject the implant if it's made from the patient's own living tissue, making a tooth the ideal durable anchor. The result is an unsettling image, a tooth visibly embedded in the white of the eye with a lens peeking through like a peephole, but it's restored vision to people thought to be permanently blind, sometimes after decades in darkness. Best known for playing Martin Corley on Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, 36-year-old actor Tyler Chase has become the next tragic reminder of Hollywood's child star curse. Fans recently spotted him homeless in Los Angeles and Riverside, sparking a GoFundMe for food and shelter. Concerned strangers began sharing videos of him on TikTok and rallying support to help get him back on his feet.
Hello, my name is Tyler Chase, and I'm here on a Christian movement for acting.
But Tyler's own mother has since urged people not to donate, insisting that the man needs medical treatment, not money, explaining that he can't manage finances or even his medications on his own, and giving him money may only worsen his situation. The ashes you get after cremating a body aren't really ashes at all. During the burn, soft tissues and organs completely vaporize into gas, and any true ash is swept away through the chamber's exhaust. What's left are small bone fragments, which are then ground up in a machine called a cremulator to create the fine sand-like remains families keep in urns or scatter across Disney World. Despite the Ride of Steel roller coaster's posted rules and safety manual requiring riders to have 2 legs, Iraq War veteran Sergeant James Hackemer, who had lost both legs in combat, was still allowed to board the ride at Six Flags Darien Lake in 2011. Midway through the ride, he was violently ejected from his seat and killed instantly. In 2021, Mexican rapper Dan Sur went viral after revealing he had surgically implanted gold chains into his scalp to replace his hair. He claimed doctors inserted medical hooks directly into his skull so the chains would permanently hang from his head, calling it gold hair. Plastic surgeons who saw the videos warned the procedure was extremely dangerous, with high risks of infection, scarring, and damage to the skull, and said that no reputable clinic would ever perform it. In 2020, a nurse named Donna Montacone, while working at Yale University's fertility center, secretly stole fentanyl from at least 175 vials intended for women undergoing egg retrieval procedures. Over a 5-month period, she replaced the powerful opioid with saline to conceal the theft, leaving patients to endure the invasive procedure with little or no pain relief. Several women later described the pain as torturous and traumatic, including at least one patient who underwent 8 retrievals while fully awake. When patients questioned the severity of the pain, Montacone allegedly assured them it was normal, delaying detection of the abuse. Investigators later determined she was diverting the fentanyl to support her own opioid addiction. She was arrested in 2020, pleaded guilty to drug tampering charges, and was later sentenced to federal prison. There's a long-running fan theory that Kevin McAllister from Home Alone grows up to become Jigsaw from Saw. The connection starts with Kevin's childhood obsession with elaborate traps, rigging blowtorches, swinging paint cans, and setting up nail-piercing steps as the early versions of Jigsaw's sadistic games. Both characters share the same piercing blue eyes and light hair, a calm, calculating demeanor, and a tendency to taunt or psychologically torment their victims. Kevin also grows up in the Midwest, while John Kramer's backstory places him in a similar American setting. Fans point out that Kevin shows no real remorse for the pain he inflicts. He laughs as the wet bandits are electrocuted, burned, and brutalized, and that his creativity seems to flourish under isolation and neglect, a psychological connection to Jigsaw's warped sense of justice. Even the iconic tricycle in Saw has been compared to Kevin's love for riding around on bikes in the Home Alone films. In this theory, the wet bandits weren't just burglars, they were Kevin's first test subjects. During the War on Terror, U.S. interrogators turned to music as a weapon, blasting songs on endless repeat in secret detention sites. Among the most infamous tracks was Eminem's The Real Slim Shady, which detainees reported being forced to hear non-stop for up to 20 days. Former prisoners described the experience as so unbearable that men would scream, weep, and even bang their heads against the walls for hours just to escape the sound, a form of psychological torment that left no physical scars but shattered minds. In January of 2022, shoppers at a Walmart in Crockett, Texas witnessed a bizarre and disturbing encounter. A woman named Rebecca Lynette Taylor approached a mother with an infant son and casually offered her $250,000 in cash to purchase the child. When the stunned mother refused and tried to leave, Rebecca allegedly followed her into the parking lot, doubling her offer to $500,000 and insisting she'd wanted to purchase the boy for a long time. Terrified, the mother contacted police and Rebecca was arrested and charged with the felony offense of sale or purchase of a child. Child actor Kyle Massey, who played Corey Baxter in That's So Raven and Corey in the House, was once a family-friendly icon. But in 2019, a 13-year-old girl and her mother filed a lawsuit accusing Massey of sending her explicit photos, videos, and sexual messages. The girl had met Massey years earlier when she was just 4, after her mother introduced them on a set. According to the lawsuit, Massey later reconnected with her and promised to help launch her acting career. But 2 years later, prosecutors in Washington state charged Massey with immoral communication with a minor after investigators found that he allegedly sent nude photos and videos to the same underage girl through Snapchat. Kyle never showed up to his court date and a warrant was issued for his arrest, but his lawyers later claimed he'd never been properly served. While Massey denied all allegations, the case effectively ended his acting career, leaving fans stunned that the goofy kid from Disney could end up being accused of something so disturbing. As of now, no conviction has been publicly reported, and the legal proceedings have faded quietly from headlines, but the case still remains a strange, unsettling fall from fame for one of Disney's once brightest faces. On December 10, 2021, a violent tornado tore through the Rackley family's home near Caruthersville, Missouri. 9-year-old Anistine and her sisters huddled with their mother in a windowless bathroom, where their mom snapped a final photo to reassure relatives that they were all in their safe space. But moments later, the twister ripped the house apart and hurled the family into a nearby field. While Anistine's parents and sisters survived with injuries, the 9-year-old girl was tragically killed. In 1999, Texas man Herschel Rawls went into surgery to have his cancerous bladder removed, but he woke up to an absolute nightmare. Without warning, doctors had also amputated his beef bayonet, claiming that the cancer had spread and that the drastic step was necessary to save his life. But weeks later, pathology tests revealed that the penile tissue they had cut away wasn't cancerous at all. After years of anguish, Rawls sued and in 2003 reached a quiet out-of-court settlement, but was left with the grim reminder of how a single surgical decision can leave a patient permanently mutilated. When he was only 10 years old, Charlie Sheen traveled with his father to the Philippines for the filming of Apocalypse Now. There he witnessed a real water buffalo being decapitated by a machete in a ritual sacrifice, a moment filmed for the movie. Sheen later said the image stayed burned into his memory and was one of the most brutal things he had ever witnessed. At the peak of his fame, Charlie was burning through drugs at such an insane pace that he admitted he had a different reality. At one point, the actor was spending nearly $2,000 a day on cocaine and once admitted to smoking enough crack to fill a swimming pool. His binges spiraled into weeks-long parties filled with drugs and sex, where he bragged about sleeping with both men and women while high. It was during this reckless era that he contracted HIV, a diagnosis he kept secret for years as rumors about his health exploded. When Sheen finally revealed his HIV diagnosis in 2015, the confession was both shocking and life-saving. Doctors gave him credit for prompting a 95% increase in HIV testing kits, likely saving thousands of lives. In 1990, Sheen's engagement to actress Kelly Preston came to a bloody end when she was shot in the arm inside his home. Sheen later claimed a revolver had slipped from his pocket and accidentally discharged when it hit the floor, but the incident was enough for Preston to leave him immediately, prompting rumors that Charlie had actually attempted to kill her. While filming Money Talks, Charlie binged so heavily on cocaine that he suffered a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. The bleeding went on for 18 straight hours, leaving him physically drained and terrified. On the set of Free Money, after days of partying, Sheen was so exhausted and paranoid about passing out that he tried a bizarre method to stay awake. He claims he shoved an ice cube up his rectum to shock his body into alertness. He later recounted the story as one of the lowest points of his addiction. In 1995, Sheen's drug abuse had reached such a catastrophic level that doctors found his blood saturated with cocaine at a concentration so high it should have killed him on the spot. Paramedics were stunned that he survived the overdose, with some calling it a medical miracle. But finally, after years of infamous drug binges, public breakdowns, and reckless behavior that nearly destroyed his career, Charlie claims he's now been sober since 2017, over 8 years without drugs or alcohol. He admits he still gets constant cravings, but says he fights them by remembering the shame and chaos of his tumultuous past.